The air that night in southern Alabama was thick enough to taste, warm still, and humming with crickets that refused to quiet. It was May 12, 2006, a Friday that had settled lazily over Bruton, the kind of small town where porch lights glowed like steady beacons and conversations drifted through screen doors. Nothing ever truly happened there, until something did. Emily Grace Thornton's world was gentle. At 28, she'd built a life that revolved around books, children, and rhythm. Her rhythm. She was the librarian at Bruton Elementary, known for her soft voice and her habit of tucking a daisy into her hair on Fridays. The kids called her Miss M. She called them my tiny explorers. Her co-workers said she had an old soul. Her sister called her the family's quiet compass. That evening she left work just after 7, waved to the janitor locking up, and drove her silver Honda Civic down Douglas Avenue toward the Winn-Dixie on the corner. She bought a loaf of bread, a carton of milk, and a small bouquet of daisies. Always daisies. The store's camera caught her smiling faintly as she waited at the register, the blue cardigan she wore slipping off one shoulder. Their small-town errand, 10 minutes at most. At 9:24 p.m., a neighbor across the street noticed her car still sitting in the driveway, headlights dim but still on, driver's door half open. By the time he walked over, the engine had gone cold. Groceries still on the passenger seat, door ajar. No Emily. When deputies arrived an hour later, the scene felt frozen in time. The keys were gone. Her purse and wallet were still inside the house. There was no sign of forced entry, no disturbance, no note. Only that strange stillness that settles when something has gone wrong. And no one yet knows what. Her younger sister Rachel called every hospital within 50 miles before, dialing the sheriff's office again at 12:31. Her voice cracked. She wouldn't just leave. She's scared of the dark. She hates driving at night. By sunrise, the Thornton family's front yard was crowded with patrol cars and flashlights sweeping through dew-wet grass. Back then, 2006, tracking a phone meant towers, not satellites. They managed to ping hers once, 4 miles west near Old Castleberry Road, a lonely stretch lined with pine and kudzu. Officers combed the ditches until dawn. Nothing. News spread by morning coffee. By midday, people who had seen her the night before replayed every detail. She smiled at me in the parking lot. She waved when she drove past. Her car lights looked off. In small towns, rumor fills the space. Truth leaves behind. The sheriff's department called it a missing person case, but most locals whispered the word abduction. Bruton wasn't used to tragedy. It had seen storms and layoffs, not vanishings. Within 24 hours, more than 100 volunteers showed up. Church groups organized lunch tables. Students handed out flyers printed on school copiers. The image was everywhere. Emily smiling shyly, a daisy tucked above her ear. Helicopters circled the riverbanks. Dogs searched abandoned sheds. Deputies found her phone 2 days later, face down in the grass along a service road, battery removed, as if someone knew what they were doing. By the end of the first week, the search shifted from hopeful to haunted. The FBI was briefly consulted, but with no ransom, no clear suspect, and no body, the case drifted between divisions. Detective Tom Branson, then 47, was assigned as lead. He'd worked robberies, not missing persons, but he took it personally. He taped Emily's photo above his desk and told his partner, "We find her or we don't sleep." Every interview led nowhere. Her co-workers adored her. Her ex-boyfriend had a solid alibi. He was attending a cousin's wedding in Mobile that night, verified by photos and timestamps. Strangers seen in town were questioned, trucks inspected, fields dug up, all dead ends. Summer bled into fall. The Thornton house stayed lit every night. Rachel slept on the couch waiting for a knock that never came. Emily's mother stopped cooking. Her father stopped mowing the lawn. The mailbox filled with sympathy cards. Reporters came, asked gentle questions, left. And then they stopped coming too. What remained was a file of 327 pages. statements, photos, maps with circles drawn in red ink, and one small, plastic evidence bag containing a torn piece of fabric discovered in a roadside ditch. Pale cotton, faint stain. It was logged, sealed, and stored in a cabinet marked pending. Technology back then couldn't make much of it. By Christmas 2006, Bruton moved on. The decorations went up downtown, the search command post was dismantled, and Emily's name faded from headlines. But her family kept searching. In 2007, they held a candlelight vigil outside the library where she'd worked, reading her favorite poem aloud. Rachel created a MySpace page titled Find Emily Grace, uploading childhood photos and pleading for tips. Comments trickled in, then slowed. Years passed. Leads resurfaced and withered. In 2009, a hunter found a woman's shoe deep in the woods off County Road 23. Testing showed it wasn't hers. In 2010, a drifter claimed he'd seen someone matching Emily's description hitchhiking near Montgomery, but it proved false. Each rumor reopened the wound. Detective Branson transferred to another unit, but never let the case go. He kept the photo in his desk drawer, Emily, eyes half squinting in sunlight, holding a library book against her chest. He'd take it out sometimes during night shifts, studying her face as if it might offer an answer. It was the not knowing, he'd later say. That's what eats you alive. The town changed. Cell phones got smarter, people got busier, and the story of the missing librarian became something older residents told newcomers on stormy nights. That girl who vanished? Never found her. Then came 2019. Across the country, cases once deemed unsolvable were stirring again. New forensic labs were extracting usable DNA from samples smaller than a pinhead. Genealogy databases were identifying killers from decades past. Alabama agencies began quietly revisiting cold cases that had slept for years. Branson, by then 60, semi-retired, sat in on a departmental meeting where a young analyst mentioned familial matching. He thought of the cloth sealed in that bag. 2 days later, he drove to the evidence room, signed it out, and mailed it to the state lab in Montgomery for re-examination. The odds were slim. The sample was old, possibly contaminated, but he'd learned that hope, even microscopic, was worth chasing. Months went by without a word. The world kept spinning. Pandemic headlines, retirements, new hires, but somewhere inside a lab freezer sat a fragment of fabric and, unknowingly, the beginning of an answer. In December 2020, an email landed in Branson's inbox. DNA profile detected, partial male. Viable for comparison? It wasn't much, but it was more than he'd had in 15 years. Cardis returned no hits. Whoever it was hadn't been arrested before. Still, it meant one thing. Emily hadn't simply walked away. Someone had been with her that night. Someone whose DNA had clung for all those years to a thread of cloth found in the dark. Branson printed the email, folded it neatly, and slid it behind her photo. "We're not done yet," he whispered. Outside, Bruton slept the way small towns do, quietly believing some mysteries stay buried. But deep in a server hundreds of miles away, that anonymous DNA strand had begun to trace invisible lines through family trees, hinting toward a truth no one was ready for. The silence was beginning to crack. Time has a way of dulling noise. In Bruton, Emily Thornton's name stopped echoing across police radios, and the hum of daily life returned. New subdivisions rose on farmland, the old grocery store replaced its cameras, and most of the faces on the 2006 search team had long since retired. Yet somewhere inside the Escambia County Sheriff's Office basement, a gray cabinet still held her evidence box, dust gathering around its label, Thornton. Emily Grace, open case. Detective Tom Branson retired officially in 2015. His hair had gone white, his gait slower, but his mind never stopped circling that single question. Where did she go? He'd sometimes drive out toward Old Castleberry Road on Sundays, park by the ditch where her phone was found, and sit with the windows down, the sound of cicadas rising like static. He called it his one unsolved prayer. Every few months, Rachel Thornton would still email the department. Any updates? Most times she got the same response. We'll notify you if anything develops. She'd learned to decode that. It meant nothing had. By 2020, Rachel was 35, married, with a child of her own. Yet every May 12th, she returned to Bruton to place daisies by the library's front steps. Then came the email from the Montgomery lab, the one that changed the quiet. Branson printed it out the moment he read it. Partial male profile detected, viable for comparison. After 15 years of silence, it was proof that somewhere within that cloth fragment, the truth had survived. He called the new cold case supervisor, Lieutenant Janine Marlowe, the pragmatic woman who had joined the department years after Emily's disappearance. She'd heard of the case, of course. Everyone in Escambia County had. But she had never imagined there might still be usable evidence. If we've got a viable profile, Branson told her over the phone, then we're one database away from a miracle. Marlowe wasn't the sentimental type, but she respected his persistence. She forwarded the profile to the Alabama Bureau of Investigation's Forensic Division, requesting it be run through the National CODIS system once more. Technology had advanced since the last check in 2010. The result came back the same, no match. But 2021 was a different era. Across the country, detectives were solving decades-old homicides through genetic genealogy, a new forensic frontier that used publicly available ancestry data to trace unidentified DNA to distant relatives. It was controversial at first. Privacy debates, legal gray zones, but the results were undeniable. Arrests were being made in cases once thought impossible. Marlowe reached out to Parabon Nanolabs, a Virginia-based company known for its success with genetic genealogy investigations. They agreed to take the case pro bono, intrigued by how intact the DNA sample was after so many years. In February 2021, the cloth fragment and extracted profile were shipped under tight chain of custody procedures to Parabon's lab in Reston, Virginia. Weeks turned into months. Genealogists began building what they called a family tree of possibility, starting from the unknown male profile and working backward through the matches of distant relatives who had uploaded their DNA to consumer sites like GED Match and Family Tree DNA. Each match came with probabilities, shared centimorgans and surnames scattered across counties and states. By summer 2021, they had a cluster of connections pointing towards southwest Alabama and the Florida Panhandle, a network of second and third cousins sharing fragments of DNA with the unknown suspect. The genealogists narrowed their search to a handful of family lines with deep roots in that region. Meanwhile, Branson couldn't sit still. Though officially retired, he drove up to Montgomery to meet with the analysts in person. He carried with him Emily's original missing person file, its pages yellowed and frayed. When he laid it on the table, the young technicians stared at the handwriting. Pen notes in margins, addresses crossed out. It was a relic from a different investigative world. "We didn't have your tech back then," he told them. "We had instinct and luck. Now you've got data. Maybe it's time luck cashes out." They promised to update him as the tree developed. Outside of the lab, the country was still clawing its way through the aftermath of the pandemic. Funding was tight, backlogs heavy, and genealogical searches required patience. Branson went home and waited. Each morning he checked his email before coffee, half expecting disappointment. Then, on October 7, 2021, a message arrived from Parabon's lead genealogist. "Strong lead located. Please call." When Branson dialed the number, he listened as the analyst explained how one branch of their DNA tree converged around two brothers born in the early 1980s, both from Escambia County. The pattern of shared DNA among relatives pointed directly toward their paternal line. One of those brothers had died in 2015, The other was alive and living less than 30 miles from Bruton. Branson scribbled the name down, his pen shaking slightly. He recognized the surname. It had appeared once, buried in a witness statement from 2006. A casual mention, dismissed at the time because there had been no evidence connecting the man to Emily. He exhaled slowly. "I'll be damned." Lieutenant Marlowe ordered a background check. The surviving brother, now 42, had a minor criminal record, DUI, petty theft, but nothing violent. Still, he'd been working construction around Bruton in 2006, roughly 3 miles from where Emily's phone was found. The genealogists cautioned, a genetic lead wasn't proof, only a path. They recommended covertly obtaining a direct DNA sample for confirmation. That meant surveillance, discarded items, a cup, a cigarette butt, something legally collected from public space. By winter 2021, Marlowe assembled a small task force of investigators and state analysts. Branson was given clearance to consult unofficially. For the first time in 15 years, he felt a pulse beneath the file. As the investigation reignited, word spread quietly through the department. Younger detectives who'd grown up hearing the story now watched in awe as technology rewrote history. "It's like she's calling us back," one of them said. In January 2022, investigators began tailing the man identified through genealogy. Let's call him Subject A for now. He lived in a single-story home near Atmore, worked odd construction jobs, and spent weekends fishing the Escambia River. No wife, no kids, no steady record of employment. He blended into the kind of life that leaves few digital footprints. The team followed him carefully, collecting a half-smoked cigarette he tossed outside a gas station. The item was sealed and sent to the Montgomery lab for testing. Weeks later, the results came back. Male DNA consistent with the profile recovered from Emily Thornton's case. Probability match greater than 99.99%. Marlowe sat back in her chair, silent, for a long moment. Then she called Branson. "We got him," she said quietly. "You sure?" "I'm sure. But it wouldn't be that simple. Before an arrest could be made, they needed corroboration, something physical, something tying him not just genetically, but geographically to the night of the disappearance. They began reopening interviews, revisiting old witnesses, dusting off statements that hadn't been read in a decade. One, in particular, stood out. A gas station clerk from 2006 had mentioned a silver sedan parked near the edge of the lot around 9 p.m. A man standing beside it smoking, watching the road. The clerk thought nothing of it at the time. When detectives showed her a recent photo of Subject A, her face went still. "That's him," she said. "I remember because of the scar by his jaw. I joked he looked like he'd wrestled a bobcat." The report was added to the file. Meanwhile, Branson found himself waking before dawn, pacing the same living room where Emily's photo still hung on the wall. He'd spent years imagining closure and was now standing on its edge. He knew the arrest would come, but he also knew it wouldn't bring her back. "Solving it isn't peace," he told his wife one evening. "It's just light after too long in the dark." By late 2022, the case had grown beyond county lines. The district attorney's office authorized further DNA verification, this time through an independent lab in Florida, to eliminate any question of error. The results matched again. Same male profile, same statistical certainty. For the Thornton family, the phone call came quietly one Tuesday afternoon. Rachel answered from her kitchen, her son playing in the background. The detective's voice on the other end trembled slightly. "We've identified someone. We're working toward an arrest." Rachel didn't cry right away. She sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the daisies in the vase. For years she'd rehearsed what it might feel like to hear those words, but reality came like static, unreal, heavy, impossible. Across Bruton, Old wounds began to stir. People who hadn't spoken of Emily in years mentioned her again in grocery store lines and church pews. They wondered who the suspect was, if they'd known him, if he'd been among them all along. The sheriff's office stayed silent, releasing no names. Investigators moved carefully, retracing the suspect's movements from 2006, confirming employment. Records cross-checking phone tower logs, data that barely existed back then, but could now be resurrected through archived billing files. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened. By early 2023, they had what they needed: genetic confirmation, witness recollection, circumstantial evidence placing him near Emily's last known location, and a prior police contact record from that very night. Their plan was drafted. The arrest would take place quietly, without media, early morning. Branson was invited to observe. He hadn't been in uniform for years, but on that March morning he arrived before dawn, coffee in hand, standing under the sodium light of the sheriff's parking lot. He watched the team gear up, vests marked sheriff, radios crackling. 15 years of silence were about to end. As the convoy rolled out toward Atmore, mist curled over the fields, the same kind of pale fog that had hung over Bruton the morning Emily vanished. Branson stared out the window, the hum of tires steady beneath him, and thought, "We're bringing her home." What awaited them at that small house by the river would finally expose the truth that had haunted a town for nearly 2 decades. For nearly 15 years, the Thornton case had lived in the shadows, a file number more than a name, a fading memory in a town that had long stopped whispering her story. But in early 2021, something shifted. At the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences in Montgomery, a young forensic analyst named Claire Abbott opened the digital file marked Bruton Missing Person, 2006. She was 29, born the same year Emily disappeared. For her, cold cases weren't legends. They were puzzles left behind by older generations of investigators. Inside the lab, she placed the preserved piece of fabric under sterile glass and began the slow, meticulous process of reanalysis. DNA extraction had evolved drastically since 2006, where once scientists needed entire stains, they now worked with invisible particles. Claire wasn't expecting a miracle. Degraded samples often collapsed during sequencing, but this one, fragile, pale, preserved by time and luck, yielded something rare. A viable Y chromosome signature. That single trace, and invisible to the eye, carried within it the genetic fingerprint of a man who had touched Emily's life in her final moments. The CODIS system still found no direct match. The man had never been arrested, never swabbed, never entered into the National Criminal Database. For most cases, that would have been the end. But 2021 was not 2006. Across the country, detectives were beginning to rely on something entirely new: investigative genetic genealogy. The process was controversial, combining traditional law enforcement with open-source DNA databases used by ordinary people searching for their ancestry. Privacy debates raged, but the results were undeniable. Killers from the 1980s, 1990s, early 2000s, all being unmasked by family trees and digital bloodlines. Detective Branson, now retired but still consulting, was skeptical when Claire called him. "You're saying you can find this guy's relatives without him ever giving a sample?" he asked. She smiled through the phone. "That's exactly what I'm saying. It took 6 weeks of digital cross-referencing. The partial profile was uploaded, legally and carefully, to 2 open-source genealogical platforms. Thousands of distant matches appeared, 3rd, 4th, 5th cousins, people who had sent in their saliva to learn their heritage, unaware their data might one day solve a crime. Claire spent nights mapping connections, tracing surnames and building a massive digital family tree. Every branch represented a possibility, every connection a lead. Eventually, she narrowed it down to one cluster, a lineage tied to rural Baldwin County, about 60 miles south of Bruton. Among the descendants was a surname that caught her attention, Hollis. She dug deeper. The Hollis family had lived in southern Alabama for generations. Carpenters, mechanics, farmers. One male branch aligned genetically. With the unidentified DNA Claire presented her findings to the district's cold case unit in May 2021. Based on shared DNA and genealogy modeling, she explained. The suspect likely belongs to the Hollis family. Male, between 35 and 45 years old in 2006, living within a 100-mile radius. Branson listened quietly. His hands trembled just slightly as he turned the old photos over. Emily's face, the fabric sample, the map of where her car was found. He whispered, "We're getting close, aren't we?" Claire nodded. Closer than anyone's ever been. Detective Sergeant Kyle Minter was assigned to follow up. He was younger, part of the new generation of digital investigators, but he respected Branson's obsession with detail. Together, they began the painstaking process of identifying every Hollis male who fit the age and location parameters in 2006. There were 6. The team built profiles on each. Employment records, vehicle ownership, addresses. 4 had moved out of state. 1 had died in a car accident in 2012. That left one man still living quietly within Alabama's borders, Robert Allen Hollis, born 1978, high school dropout, worked various construction jobs, lived most of his life near Castleberry, the same rural stretch where Emily's phone had last pinged 15 years earlier. A coincidence, perhaps. But detectives didn't believe in coincidences anymore. Hollis had no criminal record, not even a speeding ticket. Married once, divorced by 2010, no children. He lived alone in a small rented house near the edge of town, mostly keeping to himself. His social media was sparse. Photos of trucks, hunting trips, a dog. To the world he was invisible, but invisibility can hide a lot. In September 2021, under the guidance of state attorneys, investigators obtained a surreptitious DNA sample. Hollis was followed to a gas station just off Highway 41. He tossed a plastic cup into the trash after finishing his drink. The cup was retrieved under legal surveillance and sent for testing. It took 2 weeks. On October 19, 2021, the results came back. The lab's report was brief, clinical, devastatingly precise. DNA sample from item recovered from subject Hollis, Robert A., matches the unknown male profile recovered from evidence item Bruton 2006-05. Probability of random match, 1 in 3.4 trillion. Detective Minter called Branson immediately. The old detective sat in silence, hand gripping the phone, eyes on Emily's photo. "After all these years," he murmured, "we finally have him. They couldn't arrest him right away. The district attorney wanted more, was context, corroboration, a timeline. Memories fade, evidence decays, and courts demand more than DNA alone. So the investigation widened. Neighbors recalled Hollis living in the area back in 2006, driving an older model pickup, sometimes working near Bruton on construction contracts. One woman mentioned he'd been seen at the Winn-Dixie around the time Emily vanished. He came in late, bought cigarettes and beer, looked nervous. Detectives dug into employment logs from that month. One entry confirmed Hollis had clocked out early on May 12th, the exact evening Emily disappeared. He'd told his supervisor he had something to take care of. Piece by piece the puzzle reassembled. Still, the challenge was building a case that would hold